Are you guys ready for maximum absorption, right? We're learning how we can eat so we'll get the maximum absorption of the nutrients, and tonight we need the maximum absorption of information, right? So we're going to just say a prayer. This is a dedicated facility, and we're going to say a prayer for volunteers before we begin. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessing of life and health. I pray a blessing upon each one who is here. I pray you give us clearness of mind to understand the topic that's presented tonight, and please be with our brother here, Mr. Myman. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
How's everyone doing this evening? Fantastic. All right. Well, I'm going to just ask everyone if you could turn off your cell phones, just as I'm doing right here as well. That would be most appreciated. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, for those of you who missed last night's meeting, who all would that be? Who was not here last night? Wow. Okay. Who was here last night? Okay, good. We have a number of who did return. That's a good sign. We're going to recap a little bit about of the information we talked about last night. So don't worry, you're not going to be left in the dark. Even though we covered some important topics, we're going to briefly recover a few of these things so that you're caught up to speed. But before we do that, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, because there was a request to know who is Ron Meinhardt and what's he doing here anyway. Well, my name is Ron Meinhardt, and many of you probably met my family as well. They should be somewhere around here. You'll see them, I'm sure, by the end of the night tonight. But as you can see, I have a lovely wife and 4 daughters. And yes, we travel from place to place giving health and wellness lectures. We are based out of southern Idaho, but we travel all over the United States. And I do mean all over. We actually, in 2 years' time, we put 80,000 miles on our little minivan to drive around in. So, and the reason why is because there's such a need. Health and wellness is such an undercovered topic in this day and age. And I'll submit to you, we may hear bits and pieces of things, we may be able to pick up magazines and read about them, but we need much more than this. The U.S. Public Health Service in 1994 stated that the ideal healthcare system would consist primarily of health education, which is what we do with our ministry. But you know what? The actual healthcare system focuses the very least amount of resources on public health and prevention efforts. So when I learned of these things, I decided that I wanted to move out from my hospital-based job as an RN, and I wanted to go out in the communities and help people in a very simple way, but in a very profound way, in primary public health education, primary prevention, which is what we're doing today. We're not here to diagnose or treat diseases, but we're here to educate you in general ways so that you can make informed decisions based on previous knowledge and convictions, and based on the information presented, that you can make informed decisions. Because I'll submit to you, the reason why most people are dying in the United States today is because of the lack of certain types of knowledge dealing with health and wellness. It's actually been said that the number one cause of death in the United States today is due to modifiable behavioral risk factors. That would mean simple things that we can change are the leading causes of death in the United States. So we're going to talk about some things that you can possibly change by your decisions, by your manner of thinking, your manner of expressing emotions and that kind of thing, and your physical actions that could have a profound influence, positive influence upon your health. And this is my desire. This is why we travel from place to place. It's because I want you to know what you need to know to make a good decision. And I don't want to force you to make a decision. Don't worry, I'm not going to force anyone. But I want to encourage you to make healthy choices, because we need them in this country. We're in dire need. The top 4 causes of death death in the United States, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and COPD. All of these diseases are directly linked to lifestyle, which means we can make decisions that would save potentially millions of people's lives every year. So I hope that you take into consideration that fact, and as we look at these concepts together, it's my desire that you do realize that there may be some things that could be beneficial changes or healthy choices that you can make in your own lives. So I'm not sure why we don't have that up there. We should be seeing a picture that's worth 1,000 words. But, not quite. Well, I'll go and tell you tonight's title about that. Food and mood. Food and mood. Do you believe that food can impact your mood? Oh, we know that for a fact, right? Because let's say we get anxious or depressed, what do we go get sometimes? Comfort foods, right? Foods that spike our serotonin and our dopamine. And ultimately, they may or may not eventually help us, but they will do something physiologically. But we're not necessarily going to talk about these foods today. We're going to talk about foods that have a direct or indirect effect upon the gut and the bacteria and organisms that live there. Okay? We're going to talk about bacterial colonization of the intestines tonight. We're going to talk about yeast colonization. We're going to talk about a whole lot of topics that I think are very important. But there's one really important thing I want you to realize, and that is that, as the caption will show you up here, as soon as this diagram comes on, no brain is an island. Everything that we do affects the brain. Everything. If you stub your big toe, your brain sympathizes with that stub. Did you know that? Why? Because you feel the pain, right? And unrelieved pain causes what? If it goes on chronically, it causes anxiety, right? There's this whole loop, this feedback loop that goes on where our brain is not an island, it's directly linked with how our body feels. And it's important for us to take care of both of these organs, both sensitive organs, the nervous system, and the whole body itself. So, yeah.
Switch over to the right input first.
We try to meditate. Anyone ever had technical difficulties with their brain? You know, the brain is much more resilient than this hardware right here. I'm very thankful that the brain can actually fix itself sometimes. This will not fix itself, so we have to take care of it. Can't go on without fixing this, but the brain will sometimes fix itself if we, of course, give it the right ingredients and the right atmosphere to promote its health. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself. How about it? Since we're waiting, would you like to know more about me? Okay. Well, nursing school was a great time for me. I actually went into nursing school because I had a really strong desire to help people with their health. I had a major health turnaround in my own life during my college years. And I really experienced a much more vibrant life because of changes with diet, exercise, just my manner of thinking. Positive thinking, positivity is a wonderful healer. I don't know if you realize that. But I really wanted to help people to take hold of these same things. So I got a job in a hospital, and I really liked to see the interaction the nurses had with their clients. I thought that was wonderful, really special interaction there. And so I thought, well, maybe that would be the job for me. So I ended up changing my major to nursing, went through nursing school, and my very first patient, his name was Mr. B. I don't know his whole rest of his name, but we had to write a critical analysis of the first patient that we ever had in nursing school, and I had to write a 40-page paper on a 10-minute conversation. Can you believe that? The things they put us through in nursing school, it's unbelievable at times. But anyway, I wrote this paper and got to know Mr. B very well. He actually had gone into the nursing home because he had some difficulties. His wife had some difficulties. I think we're going to have to get a little closer since that cable's shorter. His wife had some difficulties, and so he moved in with her. His wife passed away, and he got depressed, and he just ended up staying there. So I really enjoyed my time with Mr. B. We developed a really nice friendship, and I really learned to really empathize with people that are in that condition. His family didn't really come to visit him, and it just was kind of dismal, his outlook in life. But we became good friends. But as every nursing student has to do when the duty calls, we had to go on to our next clinical rotation. And so I left Mr. B behind and went on to other things.
Do you have it on a flash drive anywhere?
You know, I don't.
Take your computer up there and you can do it on your notes.
I do. It worked, yes, fine yesterday.
Can we put it on a flash drive real quick?
It's a...
Put the computer up there, should be able to run it.
Is there anything else that we can do to try?
Without a lot of time, there's not much troubleshooting time. So here I recommend keep in sync.
Okay. You have a keynote? Sorry about this.
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So it's copying, less than a minute. So let me finish the story about Mr. B. I probably went about 1 year without seeing Mr. B. And as I was working in a hospital one day, actually was taking, I can't remember what it was, a patient or just some material over to the ER. And I'm pushing this, whatever it is, but I stop and I look over, and there in a little alcove, there's Mr. B laying on a stretcher. I walk over to him, and I notice that he's not moving. He seems to be unconscious, maybe even comatose, and I'm wondering what's going on with him. I run over to the charge nurse, and I tell her, hey, this was my first patient in nursing school. What happened to him? Why is he here? And she said, oh, he got dehydrated. And I thought to myself, he's here because he didn't get enough water to drink? And it was profound. I don't know if he ever made it out of that hospital. In fact, among the elderly, dehydration is one of the top admitting diagnoses. And even if people get adequately rehydrated, usually within 1 year, they die. It's very traumatic to the body to have that state of dehydration occur. And so it was very startling to me to see this happen. But I'll submit to you, I got a chance to do something about this issue. Okay, it's under food and mood. I'll show you right here. If you scroll down, it's right here. So slide 41. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks. Okay. So this was my opportunity. My nursing professor came to me, or one of my nursing professors, and this was my very last semester of nursing school. And she said, Ron, I want you to do an extracurricular activity or assignment for me. And I was thinking, with my time, should I really sign up for something extracurricular for extra credit? And then she told me what it was. She said, I want you to go to a retirement center and present on the benefits of drinking water to a retirement community. And I said without hesitating, I'll take it. I'll do it. And so I spent so much time trying to get the pieces together for this presentation. I probably made it into a lot bigger assignment than it needed to be. But the reason why is because I wanted to help these people there. I wanted to prevent what happened to Mr. B from happening to them. And so I even went to the local bookstore and I had a stack of books about water drinking about this high. And as I was very strange, I don't think it was a coincidence, as I was walking out of that bookstore or walking to the checkout, one of my nursing professors saw me. And she looked at me and she just thought, what is he doing? He's taking this project a little bit too serious, I guess. But I really put a lot of time into it. I wanted to make sure I covered all the bases. And so by the time it was all said and done, I had a 4-page report that I was going to basically read to my audience and answer any questions that they may have. So I also went to the local membership warehouse and got one of those huge boxes of water with all the 32 bottles of water, this carton. And so here I am walking into this retirement center. I walk through the first set of double doors, into the next, and I look around, and there's only 2 people there. And one of them was my nursing professor. The other one, I think she just forgot to leave when lunch was or breakfast was over. So anyway, I set my waters down, gave each person a water, and I gave my presentation. And I enjoyed it. I thought, hey, this is really important. This is really important. Even though there's only 2 people here, I'm glad they were here. And so at the end of the presentation, my nursing professor thanked me. She said, Ron, can you come back next week? We'll postpone the next person's presentation until the following week if you come back next week. I said, sure, I'll come back. And so I came back the next week with my big carton of waters, -2 this time. And as I go into the room where I was previously giving the presentation, I'm just astonished. The room is packed. I think everyone was there from the retirement center, including the management. Everyone was there, and my nursing professor, of course. And so I gave my presentation, and at the very end of the presentation, I answered all the questions. People came up to me and had questions. And at the very end, there were 2 elderly ladies that were kind of hesitating. And I went over to them, and I said, well, did you have any questions on the information we discussed? And they said, yeah, we always thought water was bad for you. We may laugh, but they were serious. They went their whole lives thinking water was bad for them. And so I explained to them again what we had covered, And they said, okay, how much of this do we need to drink a day? They pointed to the water bottles they had received. And I showed them, and they went away with a smile on their face. And I think that that probably prevented them also from ending up like Mr. B. And that was profound. That really affected me in a really, really strong way. And I'll say that was the beginnings of what I'm doing now. In fact, have you seen that Amazing Health magazine that I was very blessed to write 7 of those articles? Well, the first one was that's written on water in that magazine. That's the one that I wrote in nursing school. And that's the reason why I was actually given that opportunity to write more, because someone saw that I wrote. They said, hey, can you write 7 more just like that? So I was very blessed. And I'll tell you, when you seek to help others, God will put you on a path to really be in the right place at the right time, to do all that you can do to bring health and happiness to others. And this is why I'm so glad that you're here today, this evening. And I believe that we have a lot that we can learn together. I think we're going to be truly blessed as we look at the concept of food and mood. Let's start with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we ask for wisdom as we study the wonderful workings of our bodies, workings that you have placed there because you love us and because you want to give us opportunity to live life and to live it abundantly. And so we pray you would give us wisdom to understand how this system works, how we can keep it in better function. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so food and mood. No brain is an island. Now, we see a characteristic hamburger bun there with sesame seeds on top. Why is that there? Well, it's a kind of a mystery right now. I'm not going to tell you. But by the end of this presentation, you'll realize why that's there, okay? It's not just a burger bun out in space by coincidence, okay? So take a good look at it, and we'll move on to our next slide, and eventually you'll see why that is there. Let's recap a few things that we discussed yesterday. We talked about the fact that we have something called a microbiome, and in particular, that microbiome resides in or consists of the organisms that live in the large intestine. In fact, we have 1 to 3% of our total body weight residing there in the form of bacteria, yeast, mold, fungi, whatever it is that's living there in the colon. It actually contributes at least a little bit to our overall weight. Can you imagine that? Case in point, the average 150-pound person would have up to 3 to 4.5 pounds of these organisms living in their body. Now that might not seem like a whole lot when you compare it to your weight, but when you consider the fact that these organisms are so small, when you compare them with a regular-sized human cell, they're very much smaller than many of our human cells. They're actually, in that smaller package, more cells than we have in our body, than our human cells. So as I said last night, there are really more of them than us. Could it be that they play a very important physiologic role in our bodies? Could it be that they're not just there by coincidence? I'll submit to you, they're not. You realize, studies have found that pregnant women, breastfeeding women, actually express probiotic organisms, lactobacilli, in their breast milk. And it's not due to inherent contamination. These are the same organisms they can find growing in their GI tract. Now, how do they get there? Scientists are puzzled. There may be some kind of secret passageway whereby maybe a macrophage or an immune cell brings them over. We don't really know. But it's apparently not due to contamination. And we learned last night that fruit and vegetables are excellent sources of these health-promoting bacteria. Over 200 species of lactobacilli isolated in the human saliva for healthy people. And there are probably many others many other strains that have not even been isolated. In the large intestine, scientists have isolated as many as 500 separate species of bacteria or other types of organisms that generally reside there in the colon. So there are a lot of options, but how do we sort through the options to find the ones that are best? I'll tell you, it's kind of puzzling. When you go into the probiotic section of a lot of these health food stores, there's so many strains, right? And every company is vying for your attention, right? Now, why do you think that is, ultimately? Because they'd like you to purchase their product, right? But we don't go to the grocery store and purchase all the products we see, right? We have to be discriminating consumers. And I'll submit to you the same holds true for probiotics. And you may not even need to buy any probiotics in particular if you're going to the original sources and you're supplying the body with those elements that it needs to allow for the proper growth and function of these bacteria. Humans for thousands of years have not gone and purchased capsules of probiotic bacteria, yet they probably, for the most part, have had better flora than we have in this modern age. It's a lot of it has to do with the choices that we make. So that being said, we're going to go on, and I want to encourage all of you to put on your thinking caps because you're going to need them. We're going to explore some pretty complex concepts, but I want to make it very simple for you to understand. So we're going to take it slow, but just know we're going to cover some terms that I can't really abbreviate. And they maybe sound a little complex to you, but don't worry, you don't have to memorize them. I want you just to understand the basic concepts. You can jot a few notes down if you like, but don't worry if you come across words like this one right here. Anyone seen that before? Saccharolytic fermentation. You've never seen that before? That's good. That's why you're here, right? Saccharolytic has to do with the fact that this organism breaks down sugars. Okay? So sugar breaking down fermentation. Fermentation that breaks down sugars. We talked a little bit about this last night when we mentioned the fact that there are two different types basically of organisms that break down these sugars, that ferment these sugars. They are either the homofermenters or the heterofermenters. Now the homofermenters are more of like your clean bacteria. They don't produce a lot of waste. But your obligate or your any of the heterofermenters are potentially going to produce things like this over here. This ethanol, alcohol, and carbon dioxide. Now, who likes pressurized alcohol sprayed on their skin? It's irritating, isn't it? This is ethanol alcohol. This is grain alcohol, right? Being pressure driven even into the epithelial cells that line the colon. Studies have found that it's very important for the membrane of the colon to have tight junctions between these frontline cells. Because if they split open, what happens? You can have some leakage, right? Anyone ever heard of leaky gut? That's pretty much what we're describing. On the medical terminology, you'll find it referred to as impaired intestinal permeability or increased intestinal permeability. It basically is referring to the same phenomenon of there being kind of, in a sense, passageways for fecal matter or toxins, endotoxins, toxins produced by bacteria to find their way into the circulation. Now, who thinks that's a good thing? I'm glad no one thinks that's a good thing. It really isn't. It doesn't sound good, and believe it or not, it is actually quite terrible for the body. We'll talk about that later this evening. But let's talk a little bit more about these homofermenters. I mentioned last night that there are two types of homofermenters. There is one type of homofermenter that actually will break down certain types of sugars, like the most common sugars, fructose, sucrose, glucose, and they won't make a whole lot of these harmful byproducts, mainly lactic acid. But there another portion over here that can kind of go either way. They can produce lactic acid, or if they come in contact with other types of sugars, the less commonly available sugars, which are like ribose or mannose, they're found in many different things, plants even. Ribose would be found in pretty much any living matter, even a little bit would be found even in flesh foods. But they can break these down. But when they break them down, these organisms right here, they will produce some ethanol and some other potentially not as desirable byproducts. Now, these ones over here, these will produce at any given time. If you give them glucose, they'll produce the ethanol. You give them the ribose, they'll produce ethanol. They're always going to produce ethanol. So they're always going to be giving you something you don't necessarily want, especially in large amounts there in the colon. Okay? So these ones, I would have to say, are the least desirable out of this whole this section here. And these are going to be equally as desirable. And the reason why I say that is because you don't even really necessarily have to worry about these producing those bad byproducts. Why do I say that? It's because of something known as sequential consumption, or CCR. You see, most organisms will actually not eat all their food, like let's say you had all your food sitting on a plate. They won't mix it all up, stir it all up, and eat it all together. They'll focus on one thing, and that one thing is going to be sugar primarily at first, in the case of these bacteria we're referring to. There are other bacteria that will eat other things. We'll mention those at another time. But those that are breaking down sugar and doing the saccharolytic fermentation using sugar, they're going to usually start with the glucose and the fructose, or the very available sugar that they find. Then they're going to move on. Now, how many of you like to eat that way? You like to set your portions out and you start with maybe what's most abundant, or maybe what's your least favorite, I don't know. However you do it, you start with that one thing and you finish it, right? Then you move on to the next. You're a sequential consumer, just like most of these bacteria. So if the bacteria are eating the glucose and the fructose, and by the time they get to the xylose, you're done with them, they're expelled in the bowel movement, it doesn't matter if they're going to produce ethanol, right? In the sewage system. You don't really care about that because that's not in your domain anymore, right? But what could potentially be a problem then, even with a healthier form of bacteria? Length of time. You ever heard of transit time? Transit time, it's huge. In fact, transit time, they're finding out, is probably at least equally, if not even more important than the organisms that we're putting in, let's say, the probiotic supplementation. It's even more important potentially than those probiotics we're putting into our body. Why is that? Because even the healthier bacteria, if they stay in the colon too long, they stay in the digestive tract too long, we're going to start getting some bad byproducts. They're much cleaner at first, then they start to get a little bit more messy. They start to eat the things they don't really want to eat, or if they get down in the tail end of the colon, studies have found they'll even start to break down the proteins a little bit more. We'll talk about that probably tomorrow, and what happens as a result of that. But suffice it to say, these homofermenting bacteria are the more desirable bacteria for us to consume. Wouldn't you agree? So let's go back there for just a minute. The source of the bad bacteria. There are actually quite a few different potential sources. Now, I'm not sure if I'm actually, I don't think I'm able to go backwards. I wonder if someone can jump back for me on the slide up there. Can we jump back to the chart with the 3 columns on it? There we go. We just passed. There we go. Thank you very much. So these ones right here, these are the more desirable. Even these right here are going to be more desirable, even though they can potentially produce the bad byproducts. That's only going to be in the case primarily of constipation. But we live in a society that has that issue in a major way. We'll talk about ways to fix this in just a minute. These are names of bacteria, that's correct. Now, I'll just mention a few of these. I was asked, where do these come from? I'll read a few of them. Lactobacillus San Francisco. Anyone know where that comes from? You like San Francisco sourdough bread? Yes, you know, it's wonderful for raising the bread. Why is that? Because it produces a lot of gas and ethanol, dough conditioner. And so you're going to make some nice bread with it. But it doesn't make for a nice colon, gas and ethanol. Now, on the other hand, I tried to make sourdough bread one time with my favorite bacterial species, Lactobacillus plantarum. You know what happened? Flat bread. Because it doesn't produce gas. It was eating whatever, some kind of starch, some kind of sugar, and it was not producing gas, wasn't producing ethanol. I smelled the lactic acid, but I just had sour flat bread as a result. Now, that might not make a good loaf of bread, but it sure makes for a good colon, according to the studies. Okay, so where do we get these from then? Well, I'll submit to you, we can get these if we're not cooking the bread thoroughly, if we're getting the spoon. Now, I used to love to lick the cookie dough spoon, you know, when I was a lad. But I'll submit to you, if that was raised with yeast or some kind of organism, I just gave myself a dose of probably not probiotics, probably antibiotics by terminology's sake. Probiotic means for life. Some of these organisms are not probiotic organisms. So we have to be careful that we cook these things thoroughly. I'm going to talk about bread probably later on this evening. But there's some other places where we get these, and they're right alongside of some of these other bacteria, such as cabbage. Cabbage, we can get both sides from cabbage. We can get plantarum from cabbage. I can't remember the other one. It's in my notes. Later on I'll mention it. But I also believe maybe this one, the brevis, is there in cabbage. Or maybe it's this one right here, the mesenteroids. But suffice it to say, when those go down into the stomach, most of those over here are going to be killed by the pH of the stomach. In fact, anyone ever made sauerkraut? During the first 48 hours of the sauerkraut process, you actually have an initial pH of maybe 6.5, drops down within 48 hours to a pH of maybe 3.5. The initial producers of this mixture in sauerkraut are actually going to be heterofermentive. They produce lactic acid but ethanol as well. And they'll bring down the pH to a certain point, but then they'll die off because of the low pH. Then the primary bacteria that's going to colonize and give you all those benefits of sauerkraut really begin to work, and that's the Lactobacillus plantarum. So they both come from the cabbage. They're both living there in more of a dormant state, but when they get into the right environment, that anaerobic environment, they sure take off, and they really start growing. But when we put them into the stomach, which is functioning properly, and the low pH is there, it actually can kind of weed out some of those not so desirable bacteria, even if they're present in our foods. So the optimal physiology of the digestive tract ensures, in many cases, a good bacterial colony that's going to be coming through and going through the small intestine, colonizing the colon. So this is really important. Now, there are probably other sources of these bacteria besides fruits and vegetables, but primarily our diet is going to give us whatever bacteria that we have, and it eventually colonizes our mouth. We probably got it from our diet. Maybe there may be some bacteria that have made their way in from the colonization of the skin even. We have bacterial colonies all over the patches of different bacteria. Like this is the domain right here of the propionic acid producing bacteria. They also live over here and over here. Anyone like those? They're associated with body odor. So if you really want to get rid of body odor, have your spouse wash your back because this is kind of the hiding place for them, and then they come over here. They migrate again back over after you wash them. But you'll never get all the bacteria off the skin. Even if you use hospital-grade skin sterilization techniques, you're not going to sterilize the skin. There's always going to be bacteria on major surfaces that we're coming in contact with. This is why it's so important for that stomach pH to be low, to be acidic, so it can kind of weed out those potentially undesirable bacteria that we come in contact with. Okay, any questions on that before we move on? All right, let's go on then. So we talked about this sequential consumption, and let's give you an example of how it works. Here are some of the hexose. This is the 6 carbon sugars. These are the most common sugars occurring free in nature, and they're the ones that you're going to most commonly eat as part of your meal. Let's go on here, give you an example of how this works. So let's say you have you've just eaten some cabbage. Okay, there's some glucose, or not glucose, there's some starches there on the cabbage. Your digestive tract is going to start breaking them down, but you have some opportunistic bacteria there, not necessarily harmful for you, but they're looking for glucose. They're trying to scavenge some of this sugar. And they might find some glucose, and they'll start eating this first. Then they might find some fructose, they'll eat this, and then at last of all, they'll eat some xylose. Now, if the Lactobacillus plantarum eats xylose, they'll give you some ethanol. But over here, they'll just give you lactic acid, which we learned last night is very potentially beneficial for the body. Neuroprotective, helps regulate hormones, and many other things that we discussed as well, immune system wise, and even in repairing the tissue there in the colon. But by the time you get over here, hopefully you're done with this meal, right? You're done. Now, average transit time for children, I think, is about 30 hours. Adults, maybe a little bit more than that. But we see people with transit times going up to like 84, 90 hours, maybe even longer than that. That's chronic constipation. And I'll submit to you, what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot more of these X's and a lot more of other issues going on beyond this, because the bacteria, they can't eat the more healthy things anymore. They have to turn to the least desirable things, and usually those least desirable things, they start to give out more toxic byproducts. We'll talk more about those toxic byproducts tomorrow, so please make sure you're in attendance tomorrow to learn about them. I want to tell you a little story about eating between meals. Okay, if we investigate what transit time really is all about, you'll really find this intriguing. X-ray studies have been conducted to determine the emptying time of the stomach. Now, this is starting here in the stomach. Transit time is from the mouth to the anus. That's how long it takes to go through the whole digestive tract. Let's say you have a bottleneck in the stomach. What's going to happen? You're going to have longer overall transit time, right? Let's look at some studies here. X-ray studies have been conducted to try to figure out what happens when we eat between meals. And what they found was that anything remaining in the stomach after 5 hours after a meal, it's abnormal. The stomach should have cleared out those food products by 5 hours in this case, in this study. But it usually emptied itself between the window of 2.5 hours to 4 hours. So usually it's a little bit less than that it stays in the stomach, particularly if it's some small light meal like fruit. It can end up going out of the system much quicker. This is a very interesting study, looked at individuals who had a routine breakfast consisting of cereal and cream, bread, cooked fruit, and an egg. Their stomachs were x-rayed. 4.5 hours after the meal, they were found to be empty at that point. So it took 4.5 hours for that big breakfast to be emptied from the system. A few days later, these same persons were given the same type of breakfast, which is the cereal and cream, bread, cooked fruit, and an egg. And then they started giving people food in between meals. So remember, the standard time was 4.5 hours, right, in which this meal was taken out of the stomach. 2 hours after breakfast, one person had an ice cream cone. He was found to have a residue in his stomach after 6 hours. So no longer was the food there for just 4.5 hours. It moved up an hour and a half longer. So 6 hours. That's adding to the overall transit time of the GI tract. Okay? That's an ice cream cone. All right. Another was given a peanut butter sandwich 2 hours after. He was found to have a residue, listen to this, after 9 hours. Why is that? It's because the stomach has to start digestion all over. Because that little sphincter we learned about last night, that comes between the small intestine and the duodenum, this sphincter right here, this little muscle, it will open up fully when the stomach has done its job. And there are all sorts of little testing stations here to make sure the stomach has done its job correctly. But if we put something in the stomach 2 hours after the meal has begun processing, the stomach has to start all over again. In particular, if it's some kind of high-fat or high-protein snack. And what's the rage now? It's high-protein bars, right? Now let's take a look at this then. Let's analyze this a little bit more. A third was given a piece of pumpkin pie and a glass of milk 2 hours after breakfast. He was observed to have a large amount of residue after 9 hours. The fourth was given half slice of bread with butter 1.5 hours after breakfast, repeated every 1.5 hours thereafter, but no dinner. He was found to have more than half of his breakfast still in his stomach after 9 hours. What does that mean? That's adding to the transit time, isn't it? Significantly. Okay, fifth subject. Given a routine breakfast at 8 a.m. Now this doesn't seem even possible, but this is what the study reported. Twice during the morning and twice during the afternoon, 1 bite of chocolate candy was given. What do you think happened? At 9:30 p.m., 13.5 hours after breakfast, more than 1/2 of the morning meal was still in his stomach. Now that's just one little nibble, right? So that's delaying that transit time. What could that do to the overall? There are some bacteria that are going to thrive in that acidic environment. And they're going to already start munching on that chocolate with you. But when all that's done, when that's said and done, you're going to have potentially more toxic waste at the tail end of that digestive process, because of that longer transit time. So it's serious. It's very serious. Eating between meals. Studies have found that eating over 3 meals a day increases the risk of colon cancer by over 200%. 200%. Why is that? How is that possible? Whereas other studies have found that drinking, I think it's 9 8-ounce glasses of water a day, reduce the risk of rectal cancer by up to 90%. I believe it's 92%. That's amazing. You know why? Because the dehydrated person is much more likely to suffer from constipation. I'll submit to you. So it's really important. Now, you thought you were only going to hear about probiotic bacteria, right? Not about constipation and transit time, but they're all important. They all play a role in this thing we call the microbiome. So we really do need to understand it. All right, let's move on here. Let's talk about alcoholic fermentation. Now, that doesn't sound too good, does it? We talked about saccharolytic fermentation, where you had sugar being broken down, and we talked about lactic acid fermentation. We talked about mixed lactic acid fermentation. The pure lactic acid fermentation is the more desirable as compared to possibly the mixed with ethanol production. being the undesired compound there. But this one, alcoholic fermentation, all you're getting basically is ethanol and carbon dioxide. There's no lactic acid there at all. So if that mixed lactic acid fermentation could have been a bad thing, this is much worse. Where does this come from? It comes from yeast. We do not want to have yeast as the dominant organisms living in our colons. Now, that's probably well known by many people here, but the reason why is because yeast are relying there upon ethanol fermentation. They're producing this carbon dioxide and ethanol, which we learned could break apart the junctions of the lining of the colon and increase the risk of leaky gut, increase the risk of things leaking out and causing problems. You know, want to know where the most common places where people are getting this yeast? Undercooked breads. Undercooked breads. Why is that? Because as long as there's a packet of moisture or a pocket of moisture in the bread that we're eating, the yeast have a safe haven there. They can survive that because water cools that bread down. So we have to dry out our bread. If we want to get rid of the yeast, want to kill all the yeast, dry out your bread when you cook it. And that's normal. Normally we have bread that has been dried thoroughly, right? Looks like this. But if you've ever experimented with bread making, especially those bread machines, oh, they're notorious for this. They'll leave that packet of gooey mess in the middle. You know what I'm talking about, right? Don't eat that bread. You got to cook it first. Otherwise, you've just given yourself a huge colony of ethanol-producing organisms in your colon. Want to know where probably the number one hiding place is for yeast in the American diet? Pizza. Think about it. There's usually a section of that dough. I used to make pizza. I'm not picking on pizza lovers here. I served probably thousands of pizzas in my day. I worked at 3 different Italian restaurants going through high school and college. And I know what a pizza looks like. I know what it's supposed to look like. And many times we would have this section of that dough that was just raw dough. And you know what I'm talking about. You bite into a pizza, the top part of that pizza, because it's got the sauce, extra sauce on it, it's so moist that it keeps it nice and soft and doughy and gooey there. You've got yeast. We're inoculating ourselves with yeast. So next time, think about that when you have your pizza. Make sure it's cooked thoroughly. And I think you're going to enjoy it much more, especially now that you know, right? They say ignorance is bliss, right? But once we know these things, we can take a few steps to reduce these issues. Why is this important? Well, because it's not only a difficulty when you start to have ethanol being produced in the colon, but many people are having allergic responses to this yeast as a result. In fact, it's been found that individuals with Crohn's disease, 70 to 80% of patients with Crohn's disease are allergic. Maybe a delayed sensitivity reaction. You might not get anaphylactic shock or anything from eating yeast, but they have an allergy to it nonetheless if they have Crohn's disease. 70 to 80% of these individuals, up to 15% of patients with ulcerative colitis also have allergies to yeast. And this is the Saccharomyces cerevisiae. This is the yeast that's used in bread making, brewer's yeast, nutritional yeast, all of these things. I myself, I can't eat large amounts of yeast because I went through a bout of leaky gut. And I've had the lab test that showed my greatest sensitivity was to yeast. So many people could be walking around with these yeast sensitivities. What's the way to get away from them? Well, cook your bread thoroughly and heal the gut. That's really the best way to do it. You may have to go away from yeast for a little while to allow that allergy to kind of die down. I had to do that. Usually, 8% of the population, healthy individuals, have an allergy to yeast as well. So not just people that are sick. Quite interesting information there. Why is all this important? Why is it important to know of organisms that could be breaking down our colon? Anyone have any idea? First of all, do you believe that fecal matter should be out into the bloodstream? No, right? But why? Why? What's so bad about it? Toxins, poisons. Okay, I'm going to tell you about probably the number one studied poison that comes out of the colon. There are many of them, especially if you look at bacteria that are breaking down proteins as their primary energy source. But let's look at ones that are breaking down just your commonly found foods. E. coli. We all have E. coli living in our colon. E. coli are well known for their protective abilities. They can actually protect us from pathogenic bacteria. And in fact, one study found that E. coli colonizing the colon of mice protected them from Salmonella typhi, which is typhoid fever causing organisms. So E. coli can be a good thing. But there's one thing about E. coli that's not such a good thing, and that is having to do with its innate structure. See, there are these projections on the outside of the E. coli bacterium called lipopolysaccharides. Say it with me. Lipopolysaccharides, or LPS for short. What's so bad about lipopolysaccharides? Well, they're found on these gram-negative bacteria. The difference between gram-negative and gram-positive has to do with the fact that you can apply a stain, a purple color. Under the microscope, you can see it as a purplish color. It's really, there's nothing really to it. It's just that the stain sticks to this lipopolysaccharide in this case. So they call it gram-negative bacteria. So this lipopolysaccharide actually has been found to cause quite a bit of issues. In fact, you've heard of sepsis, bacterial sepsis, or an infection that goes rampant and you have endotoxins or bacterial toxins in the bloodstream, so much so you go into shock. You know where that comes from? It comes from this lipopolysaccharide, the buildup of LPS in the bloodstream. Lipopolysaccharide is a huge inflammatory compound. In fact, if they want to run studies on mice, they'll feed them lipopolysaccharide, or they'll inject lipopolysaccharide into them, or they'll infuse it into their lungs to initiate inflammation, because it's a sure cause of inflammation. Lipopolysaccharide induces the septic shock, kills over 100,000 people a year. So in this case, lipopolysaccharide sounds like a dangerous thing, right? But it's not so dangerous when it's there in the colon. Why is that? Because the colon can handle it. It's used to handling a lot of toxins. It can handle lipopolysaccharide. But what happens when our colon is impaired, or the lining of our colon is impaired, and we actually have this issue we call leaky gut? The lipopolysaccharide is kind of like a prison, right? Prisons are okay. You don't mind being outside of them as long as the prisoners are there inside, right? But what if there's an earthquake and the prison walls fall down and there's a leaky prison, right? A prison with impaired permeability, right? Or increased permeability. And the prisoners come out. What happens? You're in trouble then, right? It's the same thing with this lipopolysaccharide. What happens here is that the lipopolysaccharide comes out into the bloodstream, and thankfully, even though it's going to cause inflammation in the body, thankfully, we have a barrier there in the brain. It's called the blood-brain barrier. That's designed to keep a lot of these toxins out of the brain. Okay? So there's a real strong barrier there. It's kind of like this shield that the brain has. But you know what it's been found that lipopolysaccharide will do to the brain? It will actually, in circulation, go over to the brain and cause these microscopic holes to develop. See if we can get our little animation to play there. It's kind of like a battering ram effect there on the brain. And so now, with holes being drilled into the brain, what do you have? You have leaky brain now, right? And so, whereas leaky gut allows bad things to go out, leaky brain allows bad thing. Now, I kind of coined that phrase myself. It probably would be more like increased blood-brain barrier permeability. Leaky brain is definitely a layman's term. But suffice it to say, you have things that you don't want going in there. And lipopolysaccharide, when it goes into the brain, causes devastating results. Some of these results come in the form of depression and anxiety. Interestingly enough, when lipopolysaccharide was given at a very low level, it was shown to actually cause acute anxiety, depressive symptoms, cognitive deficits, and even increased sensitivity to certain types of pain. So think of our aches and pains could be because of our leaky gut causing leaky brain, right? And then the lipopolysaccharide coming in there and causing us to be heightened in our sensitivity to pain, or depressed, or anxious, or just have cognitive deficits. We can't think as clearly anymore because of this problem. That's amazing, isn't it? Do you see the gut-brain connection? It's pretty clear, isn't it? And it's well documented. Now, E. coli is not the only gram-negative bacteria that we probably should be concerned with. There's another gram-negative bacteria that causes inflammation, that causes increased permeability, even if we don't have leaky gut, and that is H. pylori. H. pylori, the #1 communicable disease in the United States. I believe over 60% of Americans have H. pylori. But most people don't have problems relating to ulcers and that kind of thing, so they don't know they're infected with it. It's kind of like a asymptomatic or an infection without symptoms. But nonetheless, it can cause problems later on down the line. We're finding now the H. pylori infection actually somehow brings in a whole host of other more negative bacteria into the system. And also it causes its own problems. Now, why could H. pylori bring in a host of bad bacteria? We talked about this phenomenon last night. H. pylori actually secretes something on its outer surface called urease. And the urease will actually come in contact with the acid there in the stomach, and the urease becomes like an ammonia. Ammonia has a very high pH. So you combine stomach acid with ammonia, and you know what you have? Neutralization. So the reason why H. pylori can actually survive in the stomach is because it neutralizes stomach acid. And so you have the stomach pH going up a bit. What happens then? That low pH is not allowed to kill a lot of those other bacteria that could cause problems. So H. pylori, even if we have an asymptomatic infection, we should get rid of it. H. pylori is not something we want to have in our systems. And 60% of us probably have it. How do we get it? It doesn't sound so pleasant. It's fecal to oral. So if someone doesn't wash their hands well, and they place a dish out here at the potluck, then you know what? Everyone probably has H. pylori. I don't want to discourage you from potlucks, but I just want to encourage you to wash your hands and possibly consider that there are some simple things we can do to kill these organisms. Would you like to know what they are? Yes? Okay. Well, hold tight and I'll let you know, okay? Hold tight. We'll end with those natural remedies. So, lipopolysaccharides are found on these organisms, unfortunately, which could cause problems as well when they get into circulation. And not only in inflammation, but also in the brain, systemically and neurologically causing issues. So, what else can increase the risk or the production of lipopolysaccharide? It's been found actually certain sugars and nutrients will increase the amount of lipopolysaccharide that comes out into the circulation. So it seems like it may have an effect either on the bacterial production there in the colon or the prevalence of the leakiness of the gut. So it could cause the leaky gut. But suffice it to say, high fructose corn syrup is one of those enemies to the gut. And one study found that high fructose corn syrup administration increased circulating lipopolysaccharides, LPS, by 40%. That's huge. That's huge. It's very, very interesting. Now, there's another one, substance here, having to do with the standard American diet. Now, what do we usually consider to be the standard American diet? Burger and fries and a milkshake, right? Or pizza and a soft drink, right? Or macaroni and cheese and a hot dog, right? This is standard American diets. Overall, the standard American diet has very low fiber, but very highly refined carbohydrates, so a lot of sugars. It also has high fat, but it has low nutrients. So you don't have a lot of vitamins and minerals in this diet. Now, just the fact that we have this diet that characterizes most of the way that Westerners eat, just this fact is actually one of the biggest causes why we have leaky gut in the first place, because of the high-fat diet, the high-protein diet, and so on. Studies have shown that a typical Western-style diet, that means a high-fat, low-fiber diet, for 1 month can elevate the LPS, circulating LPS, by 71%. 71% on a consistent basis. That's just 1 month. So that's a person with a healthy diet going on a fast food diet for 1 month. They increase the circulating level of LPS and other endotoxins by 71%. What does that do to our brain? Depresses us, makes us anxious, increases cognitive deficits. We can't learn as well. No wonder over 25% of Americans are struggling with some kind of diagnosable mental illness in 1 calendar year, according to the National Institutes of Mental Health, because of these types of things that are going on, right? But there's good news. There's good news. When we switch in this study to a low-fat, low-saturated fat, fiber-rich diet, or a more normal diet, which most people would say, for 1 month, we actually start to increase or decrease that baseline toxin level or LPS level by 38%. Now, hold on a minute. Which one is higher? The bad diet increases by 71%, right? But the good diet takes 1 month to bring that down 38% more. So I don't encourage you to have 1 unhealthy meal a day and then 2 healthy meals. Why is that? Because every healthy meal, or let's say every unhealthy meal we take, we're taking 2 steps forward, okay? You realize that? And with every healthy meal, we're taking potentially 1 step back. So the more unhealthy our meals are, the more likelihood we are to have this increased amount of LPS or lipopolysaccharide battering holes into our brain, causing depression, anxiety, cognitive deficits, increased pain sensitivity, all these things that we struggle with in this society today. That's amazing, isn't it? It's quite amazing. But the remedy is quite simple. It really is. Question was asked earlier, where do we get these bad bacteria from? Well, I'll submit to you. 25% of the normal flora that live in the mouth are heterofermentive bacteria. They'll produce some of those byproducts you don't want, like the ethanol. But there are some foods that contain much more than that, much higher concentration than that 25% that's found normally in the mouth of those heterofermenters over there. For instance, a study that looked at, let's go over a couple more. Okay, here we go. 51% of the cheese isolates in terms of bacterial species were identified in this study as obligate heterofermentive. That means that was their primary method of fermentation. They will give you alcohol. So here's one place. certain foods, and this is very low in fiber. Low fiber foods in general are going to increase the risk of constipation, increase the risk of developing those more toxic byproducts at the tail end of the digestive process. And I'll submit to you, we're in trouble because consumption of low fiber foods has increased dramatically over the past 100 years. And I told you last night, those of you that were here, we started investigating the health of the colon, the bacterial colonization of the colon over 100 years ago. Then we left off for a long time. But you know what? Because of that, the society here, the Western society at large, United States of America, Canada, the westernized countries, we have had a diet that has snuck up on us, and we've been unaware that it's actually been causing major issues potentially in our gut flora. And take a look at this. Trends in cheese consumption. 1909, average person consumed about 3.75 pounds of cheese. Look at what happened after Papa John's and Domino's and Little Caesars and all these places started making it more readily available on this wonderful, delectable thing we call pizza, right? 33 pounds average. Well, there's a good source of heterofermenters and potentially those alcoholic fermenters too if the pizza's not cooked correctly. So what can we do? What's the solution? I'm not going to focus too much on the problem. A lot of us know there are probably foods that are not the healthiest, and we need God's grace to put them aside or at least eat them less frequently. But let's look at some interesting studies and some interesting foods. Here's a very amazing food that has become very popular in recent years, and that is broccoli sprouts. Broccoli sprouts have been found to selectively target one certain strain of bacteria in the digestive tract. They won't kill a wide assortment of bacteria. They won't kill the healthy bacteria necessarily. You know what bacteria they target? H. pylori. There's a sulfur compound, it's called sulforafluorine, that is found in all broccoli. It's that sulfur smell you get when you're cooking broccoli. It's a volatile substance. It'll evaporate into the air. But in the broccoli sprouts, it's highest concentration there in the sprout. In fact, many of these medicinal plants, the highest concentrations of these medicinal ingredients are going to be found in the sprouts. So sprouts are wonderful as for their medicinal properties, and also as garnishes for sandwiches and salads and that sort of thing. So studies have reported this, and after those studies reported that broccoli sprouts targeted H. pylori, the price of broccoli seed went sky high because people started to appreciate them more. But they're still very reasonable. They're not outrageously priced. Okay, here's another real interesting food. Guava. Anyone heard of this? A little harder to find up here. Very prevalent in the southern part of the United States and Mexico. Guava contains something called quercetin, which is also found in grapes and onions and a lot of foods that we eat, fresh vegetables and even cooked onions have a high amount of quercetin. These quercetin compounds have been found to selectively target also H. pylori infection. What they'll do is they actually will stop the urea production from occurring. Remember urea? When that's produced, it initiates like that force field around the H. pylori, the ammonia, and the ammonia has a very high pH, very high alkaline. It neutralizes the stomach acid, and so H. pylori can just move around it as it wishes because it neutralizes the stomach acid wherever it goes. It's not going to be killed by the stomach acid. However, if we're eating many of these fresh fruits and vegetables, we're going to take away H. pylori's protection. And then the stomach acid is going to come in and wipe out that colonization. Sounds like a good thing, right? More reason to eat some of these fresh fruits and vegetables. And here's another one. Eat more. Oh, it's coming. It's coming. Wait for it. It's soon to appear. We're having a little lag here in our... There it is. Bananas. Bananas. You know, even bananas. How many of you like bananas? Anyone? Studies have found even bananas, just eating these fruits that we enjoy, they increase the concentration of bifidobacteria, which is a health-promoting bacteria for the most part, in the colon. So these fresh fruits and vegetables are wonderful sources of these healthy bacteria. Here's another one, which is very sweet. Honey, right? And I encourage you, learn more about honey. There are several strains they've actually isolated that live in a dormant state there in the honey. Certain lactic acid producing bacteria. I don't know the strains offhand, but I can show you the study. However, they theorize that this is one of the reasons why honey, when applied at full strength, raw honey, is helpful in healing wounds. Why is that? Because these bacteria, not only do they produce lactic acid, but if they come in contact with an enemy, they'll dump hydrogen peroxide on it. And they'll kill those pathogenic or disease-causing bacteria. So I encourage you, learn more about some of these simple foods because they're rich in many, many potential helps for the colon health, for maybe getting rid of an adverse colony of bacteria that live there in the colon, and enjoy, because God has given us so many wonderful varieties of these things. And I'll submit to you, not only do they have the healthy forms of bacteria on them innately in many cases, they also taste good. They taste good. You know what's interesting? There was a study that was done a few years ago. Scientists were wondering, well, you know, people, if they start to eat more of these, their quality of life is going to go down because they need to enjoy more of their meats and their cheeses and that kind of thing. And so they had this hypothesis. If those people go to a vegan diet, they're going to have a miserable life, and that misery is going to totally negate or do away with all the benefit they would have gotten from, of course, yeah, it's probably healthier to eat fresh fruits and vegetables and to enjoy the vegan lifestyle or plant-based lifestyle. So this is what happened. They embarked on their study, they enrolled these people, and during the course of the, I think it maybe was 16 weeks or maybe a little bit longer than that, they started doing this questionnaire that was called a quality of life questionnaire. And their hypothesis was that these people's quality of life indicators would be going down. And by the time they got to the 16th week, they would say, hey, this was terrible. I'm so glad I can return to my normal diet. Right? That was what the scientists postulated. You know what happened? The quality of life index started going up. And it never went back down. Higher and higher and higher. And when they stopped the study, I hope those people continued, because you know what? They found something good. And who would have thought? The scientists thought it was going to be misery, right? But I'll submit to you, when we make healthy choices, it actually makes us happier. Maybe those people fixed their colon issues, right? Maybe that's the reason why their quality of life index went up. But I'll submit to you, for whatever reason it is, when we start to make these healthy decisions, and we also help others to make these healthy decisions, quality of life really does improve. And I want to encourage all of you tonight to appreciate and to enjoy the quality of life that God wants to give us. He made these things back here, right? He made those bacteria. He put them in the mother's milk, right? And hopefully we got a good dose of them when we were just breastfed little babes sitting in our mother's laps. But you know what? Even now, God wants to give us the good things in this life. And I want to encourage you to take those things and to enjoy them and to continue to learn, and also to come back tomorrow at 2 o'clock when we conclude our series on the gut-brain connection. We're going to be looking at something that, if you thought these things were important, this is the most important. The very most important elements we're going to talk about are going to be tomorrow. So I want to encourage all of you to come, to bring your friends, your family, all those that can make it here. Please bring them. And also bring your thinking caps as well, because we're going to talk about some really intriguing things as well. Yes. Question here, and then we'll conclude.
I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
One was this fad of people eating 6 mini meals.
Mm-hmm.
Does that work? Or would it, if you
Mm-hmm.
you ate the next little meal too soon, wouldn't you be having problems?
Yes. You know, the reason why that, and I can understand why dietitians and many physicians are recommending the several or many small meals throughout the day. It's because if you don't change your diet, it's healthier on your blood sugar. Because what happens is if we eat a large amount of refined foods, it spikes our blood sugar, causes glycation injury, and you have high insulin, and you just feel horrible the whole day. Which also causes problems with the gut and with lipopolysaccharides. However, with no reference of changing the diet, the recommendation goes out that, hey, just make those meals smaller and eat many of them so you're not eating as much sugar, so it's not spiking quite as high. But I'll submit to you, you still get high insulin from those highly refined meals, and you get injury to the intestinal tract. Because the colon was not designed for more than 3 meals a day. How do I know that? Because what happens with the colon, every time you have the feces passing through the colon, you have colon cells that are degenerating and that are going along with that fecal matter. Until you get to the point where you look in the toilet, 60% potentially of that fecal matter is from you. It's your colon. It's disintegrated and gone in. It's kind of like a snake shedding its skin. So the constant stripping of the lining of the colon without periods of rest and time to regenerate could greatly increase the risk of colon cancer. And I think this is one of the reasons why, and this is one of the reasons they postulated in the study. There are 2 studies or 3 studies at least that showed the increased meal frequency beyond 3, so that includes any snacks in between 3 meals a day, increases the risk of colon cancer by over 200%. So it really, that admonition is seeking to fix a problem, but the real solution is to eat plenty of fiber with those 3 meals. Because if you eat a high fiber meal, it's not going to spike the glucose. You're going to have sustained energy. This is the normal way to eat. Sustained energy, it's going to take maybe 4 hours for all that good quality nutrient-dense food to be digested and leaving the stomach. And the stomach has a little bit of time to rest, right, before it has to start all over again. But at least it gets its rest, right, and you get your nutrients. And the transit time is kept down lower as well with the time between each meal. So roughly 5 hours between each meal is a good rule of thumb. Yes?
Is there any test you could do to find out what your transit time is?
Oh, yes, there's one you can do. I didn't make this up. So if you think this is vulgar, it came from a physician. Anyone like corn on the cob? There's your transit time. What you do is it's basically mouth to anus. So you eat the corn on the cob, you turn on your stopwatch, or you make a note on your clock, and then when you see the first kernels of corn appear, that's your initial transit time. And even when you chew your corn, you're still going to have that shell of the corn. That will appear. You'll see it. And I'll submit to you, most Americans do not chew their corn enough to liquefy it. So you will see it again. But if you want to just for the sake of this experiment, not chew a couple kernels of corn, you can try it for this experiment. But otherwise, chew your food very thoroughly. But the transit time then would be from initial swallowing of the corn to the time that you eliminate it as a bowel movement. Well, it really varies. I like to look at children, at their transit time, because I think that in general their colons are healthier than ours. The average transit time from mouth to anus for a child from 4 to 15 years old, the mean time was about 30 hours, according to studies. I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Now, for adults, usually they consider normal to be even like 48 hours, 2 days. But many people have prolonged even twice that long, 85-hour transit times, maybe even more than that. So what we want to do is we really want to shoot for probably within a day to 2 at the most.
Well, if the transit time is that long, is that considered constipation?
Yes. If it's over 48 hours, it's probably bordering on constipation. I don't know the exact designation that is considered constipation, and I think it varies from place to place. I've heard anecdotally that Africans and individuals in third world countries have much faster transit time than we do, even 24 hours possibly transit time. I think the reason why is because they have a healthier diet, they're exercising more, they're drinking more water as their primary beverage. Now, not every country in Africa is going to have these benefits. There are some countries in Africa that have much poorer health than we do because they've adopted Western diet and Western lifestyle, and they don't have the medical infrastructure here to support over there to support them, and so they're really struggling. But those that are living in rural environments, they're living the life of a farmer or general laborer. Generally speaking, they have healthier colons than we do. And we'll look more into that tomorrow, and we'll try to understand why that even potentially happens. We have a question here and then here, I believe.
My question was, the guanine
Mm-hmm.
amino acid,
Mm-hmm.
and would you please explain what that does? It causes the blood-brain barrier. Could you please explain that?
The LPS, is that the one you were referring to? Okay. You know, we will address amino acids and their transit across the blood-brain barrier tomorrow. So we can definitely do that tomorrow. But suffice it to say, that's an important thing to know about, to know how amino acids transfer, and to know which ones we really want for a healthy mood, because there really is a link between amino acids and mood. So that's a good question. We'll answer that tomorrow. You got to pick someone and make that your note taker. Question here? Yes, question here.
So a rule of thumb in terms of constipation
Mm-hmm.
that the firmer the stool is, the likelihood is that it has taken a longer time.
That's right. Exactly.
Number two, the frequency of a bowel is also important.
Mm-hmm.
And so people who are not constipated oftentimes will have anywhere from 1, 2, 3 small bowel movements a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that indicates a very short transit time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the person who has a bowel movement, say, every other day, and it's fairly firm and hard, you know that you have a long transit time and
Mm-hmm.
you're basically constipated.
That's right. That's right. And I've even seen studies that have shown that those firm stools, they have a lot of bacteria in them, right? They're full of they're bacteria rich, got plenty of potential probiotics, but it's still unhealthy because they've stayed there so long that they're producing things that are not healthy. So transit time, constipation, it's a huge subject, maybe even as huge, if not more important than probiotics. So I want to encourage everyone, come tomorrow, you'll learn the secrets to increasing or decreasing your transit time. Question back here and then here.
A lot of researchers think that vegetable oil causes several problems. What's your position on vegetable oil?
Vegetable oil,
Like olive oil, canola oil, sunflower, saffron.
you know what? I actually have some research on that I will be happy to share with you tomorrow. Suffice it to say, oils high in omega-6 fatty acids could potentially increase to overall inflammation because omega-6 is the source for one type of inflammation called the arachidonic acid pathway, produces prostaglandins. If you have too much omega-6 and quite a potential to develop that into inflammation, then a lot of cooking oils could cause problems. I know of people who have taken some doctor's advice and cut off their cooking oils because they had such arthritic pains, and their arthritis almost went away. So it really depends on the person. If they have a potential for inflammation, I would say that would be probably a good indication that maybe it would be at least a good idea to try cutting back to see if the inflammation subsided. But it does have an effect on the epithelial cells as well, and I have that in some research. I can present that tomorrow. So, but it's a very good question.
Also related to that, oil and vinegar salad dressing. You mentioned something about
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Well, I'll tell you what. Vinegar that you consume by mouth is not going to make its way down into the colon. Why is that? Because it's absorbed before that. But studies have found, I myself, I've chosen not to consume even the apple cider vinegar. And the reason why is because of the fact that vinegar is a very caustic material. There's a couple studies that I found. First of all, in the mouth itself, vinegar is one of the most erosive substances to tooth enamel. And according to the dentist, tooth enamel, once it's lost, you don't get it back. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of stay away from it. But also, studies have found that the mucosal cells in the colon, yes, are destroyed by the vinegar, but also the esophageal mucosa is destroyed by vinegar. So you have the esophagus, where your food, initially you swallow the food, chew it up well, swallow it. That acetic acid irritates and excoriates potentially the esophagus. And people with GERD, this would be especially detrimental because you already have irritation occurring there. I wouldn't be surprised if continued use of vinegar over a long period of time could increase the risk of esophageal cancer, just like ethanol use or alcohol use. But I've yet to find that in the studies. Another study found that vinegar can actually have a detrimental impact on the ileum, which is the tail end of the small intestine. So if you manage to consume a large amount of vinegar and it manages to make its way down to the ileum, where you have a lot of your immune cells there, if you're causing damage to that area, you could cause damage to the immune function as well, potentially. And I don't want to tell anyone, that Ron Meinhardt said you can't ever have vinegar, but I've chosen not to consume it because to me, I have enough information that I can say, you know what, I'd rather not use it because I think it can cause some problems. There are a lot of alternatives to vinegar. Lemon juice. If you like that kind of tangy taste that you get with the vinegar and the oil, lemon juice and oil would be a good alternative. And it tastes wonderful. And lemons are wonderfully medicinal. We know from thousands of years ago, some of the very first reported studies that were looking at medicinal foods, have reported lemons were good for poisonings and for relief of toxins in the body. And modern studies have validated that. So there's always a better substitute, I think. And if we can find good substitutes, we can start taking these things that could be potentially harmful out of our diets. Now, that being said, I don't know if we might have to hold off on the questions until tomorrow anymore. I don't know. We're getting a little bit late.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there'll be opportunity tomorrow
Definitely
afternoon
tomorrow. And you can come see
when
me
we're
too
not
afterward.
needing to get to bed or getting our kids to bed.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming out again this evening and just the wealth of information. I'm just you sit here and you're like, wow. Well, at least that was me. Maybe no one else was like, wow, this is great information. But thank you so much for sharing again on this topic. And as Ron said, tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock, we'll conclude the seminar. But you are also welcome to join us for our church service tomorrow, which starts at about 10:45.
White. Here we go.
There we go. So, I lost my train of thought. Tomorrow, church. Ron is going to be sharing our service, our sermon during our service tomorrow. So that starts about 10:45. And I'll put a plug in. The music's going to be really good because my teens and their friend are going to be leading song service and having special music tomorrow. And if you join us for that, then there will be a potluck in between the church service and when Ron starts at 2. And then I suppose afterwards, then we can have a little question and answer period. And then that way you can just gather up all your questions from last night and tonight and tomorrow, and we can see if he can answer them for us. And I also, last night, We had these available, the Amazing Health Facts, which he mentioned tonight. The water one was the first one he did and ended up doing 7 of the 8 articles in this magazine. And if you did not get one last night, or you've decided that you also want to take one to give to someone else as you leave, my sons are holding extra copies. And we do have some in Spanish, so if you need a Spanish one, let us know. Someone was asking if they couldn't be here tomorrow. There's a bulletin board out in the lobby, and there's the sign-up sheet for the audio if you'd like to receive the audio of these meetings. So you can write down your name and your address, and we'll get you audio, CDs, and I know Ron's working in the future on having this seminar available, and you can go to his website and be able to purchase this information. Now let's see if there's anything else. So healthislife.org. Healthislife.org is his website. I think that's it. The magazines, church tomorrow. So everyone go home, get good rest, eat a good breakfast, eat a banana in the morning, and I hope to see you, and bring a friend, because if they'd missed the first 2, you can get the audio and they can listen to the first 2, and probably there'll be lots of questions tomorrow, so people will be able to catch up probably from the question and answer period also. So good night, God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow. Oh, donation. Tomorrow afternoon, they'll be taking up another offering. All right.
Can you read what that says? What's it on? The green? No, what's it on up there?